Welcome to the run-in. We've got fun and games. We got everything you want, glory, joy and shame. Yes! This is the annual NTT20 run-in analysis episode. 8 games left for almost all of our 72 teams, and less than a fifth of the season remains. From here, the margins are fine. You stare at points gaps and fixtures and permutations so long, you feel like you're looking at one of those magic eye books from the 90s. And frankly, from here, it's more exciting. It's more dramatic. There's more jeopardy. It's more fun. So George and I are here today to look at the automatic promotion battles, the playoff races and relegation scraps across the Championship, League One and League Two. Hello, my friend.
Hello, my friend. How are you?
Well, really well. George, you know the French word that gets used in English, frisson. Frisson. It means a shiver or, and I love this phrase, aesthetic chills. And it refers to a sudden,
so
intense,
to see the chill,
emotional response, often accompanied
also
by
known as
physical
goosebumps.
sensations like goosebumps, correct? It can be triggered, according to Google, by music, art, or other experiences. Now, you know what those other experiences are? The EFL run-in.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. We
and
get through the winter months and we get to this stage and we love it.
And this time around, it feels like there are 2 title races that looked at different times like they were probably done that are now absolutely not done and kind of the opposite of done, whatever that is. And yeah, plenty to kind of going on, and even the playoff races in all 3 divisions look pretty tight. So yes, lots of excitement, lots to get into. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure no matter what we say here, there's going to be stuff that comes up that gets thrown up that we probably don't even discuss, as is the way of the EFL.
Well, correct. We're going to try our best to give an overview of each chunk of the league. By, you know, in what way are we going to do that? Well, obviously, we'll look at the league table, we'll look at the teams involved. We're going to look at form over the last 8 games, given that there's 8 games to go. We'll have a look at some numbers as well. We'll talk about intangibles. We'll talk about managers. We'll talk about fixtures. It's going to be loose. It could be quite messy, but we just want to get you guys as excited about some of this stuff as we are. Starting at the top of the Championship, George, where we've got an automatic promotion battle to die for. We had a pretty good one last season. This one's a little bit different, but has some similarities. And as we record today, I think it's become clear since the start of February, with Sunderland having just lost touch with the top 3, that we're talking about Leeds, Sheffield United and Burnley for 2 automatic promotion places. And therefore, whoever misses out, that will be incredibly painful heading into the playoffs. Leeds are top on 80 points with a plus 51 goal difference. Sheffield United level on points with a plus 25 goal difference. And Burnley 2 back on 78 with a plus 41 goal difference. In the last 8 games, all 3 teams setting a really good pace. Burnley, 20 points from 8. Sheffield United, 19 points from 8. Leeds, 17 points from 8. The standards are incredibly high. Leeds have scored 23 goals more than Sheffield United and 24 more than Burnley. And their goal difference is 10 goals better than Burnley's and 26 better than Sheffield United. But Sheffield United have picked up the most points on the pitch this season. If it were not for the 2-point deduction, they would be 2 clear. They've won 2 more games than Leeds and 4 more than Burnley. And for Sheffield United, one of their positives is they're basically equally good at home and away in terms of points return this season, whereas Leeds are much stronger at home and a little weaker away, and Burnley actually a little weaker at home and equally strong away. Then we finish with Burnley, George. They've only lost 2 of 38 league games. They were both 1-0 away defeats. They are a record-breaking defence. I say all that to say this is so exciting because these 3 teams are all setting excellent levels and doing so in slightly different ways.
Yeah, it is really exciting. And now, you know, for a long time, I was definitely of the belief that it was Leeds and one other. I think that the chances are still that it will be Leeds and one other, and still likely will be Leeds top and one other. But there is obviously now, given that there's only 2 points separating the top 3, and with Burnley still to host Sheffield United, there is a very, very live chance that Leeds do fall out of the top 2. If they, you know, as you mentioned there, if you take the points tally over the last 8 games, they're the one with the lowest points tally. And if you replicate that over the next 8 games, they would fall out of the top 2 altogether. You know, naturally, when you look at these run-ins, you look at the run and you look at the actual fixtures that these teams have coming, and often, you know, it's much of a muchness, but it does feel like there is quite an obvious disadvantage to one particular team in my mind. In this race, and that is Burnley, where the one positive that Burnley do have coming into this is that they host Sheffield United, and that in itself is massive. The opportunity to take 3 points off the team who sit 2 points above you at home when you haven't lost at home all season is a huge advantage. And their fixtures themselves don't hold loads to fear. A trip to Coventry isn't ideal, but apart from that, Bristol City at home, Millwall at home, Norwich at home, Watford away, QPR away, and Derby away. Frustrating for them, I would say, is that Derby away is their only game currently against a side currently in the bottom 7 or 8. And given what Derby are currently doing under John Eustace, they're probably the one that you want to avoid right now. And that is in stark contrast to Leeds, who, as you mentioned, have been much poorer away from home than they have been at home so far this season. But Leeds have 4 more away games this season where they've dropped most of their points, and 3 of those are against arguably the 3 worst teams in the league right now, alongside probably Stoke, in Oxford, Luton and Argyle. That is a huge advantage for them, where it'd be a massive shock. Obviously, we saw them beaten by Pompey a couple of weeks ago, but yeah, I mean, they've dropped points at home fairly consistently, but they've only beaten 2 of the top 7. It's not necessarily been the case away from home, where they've beaten Stoke, Cardiff, Derby, but with relatively little fuss. And the same can be said of Sheffield United as well, whose home form is so strong, and their away games, they've dropped points against all of the top 5 apart from themselves away this season, but they still have to go to Oxford, to Stoke, and to Argyle. And so you're kind of, you can't second guess and you can't chalk up points before a ball is kicked. But in terms of projections, the points tally that you'd expect Blades and Leeds to get from those away games is obviously high. And given how dominant they are at home, I think it gives them a pretty big advantage going into this tussle.
So the underlying numbers over the last 8 games, perhaps not surprisingly, as it has been all season, Leeds' underlying numbers exceptional per expected goals or non-penalty expected goals. They create about a goal's worth of XG more than their opponents on average every single game. That's a level of dominance that's very rare, pretty much at any level. But Burnley's have also been only slightly worse than Leeds, but still incredible over this last 8 games. And we've touched on, what we perceive to have been an incredible addition of skill and quality from Marcus Edwards that's really unlocked what was quite a stodgy attack for the first part of the season, or for the first 2/3 of the season, quite frankly. Sheffield United's numbers, by contrast, not as good. And that probably leads me into, the next thing I wanted to mention, which is intangibles. In their very nature, they are hard to discuss. They are hard to measure. They are hard to be incredibly sure on. But with Sheffield United, they have never had particularly strong numbers this season, or certainly not top 2 type numbers traditionally. But that's been the club's and the team's personality. It fits the personality of their manager. They are completely at one. Wilder, the team, the fans, he is absolutely on one. And he's a guy that, like Parker and Farker, frankly, has proven that when he's absolutely on one, good things tend to happen. I mean, George, I'm kind of at the point where I'm going to sit on the fence and not make predictions on this. This isn't a predictions podcast. There might be times where I feel like I want to stick my neck out. With this, I feel less confident than I have been at any point of the season of basically picking a top 2. It sounds like you're basically the same. I was going to ask one question to add a bit of spice outside of the prediction, and that is, if you were a fan of a team involved, and try not to think too deep about specifics here, you're just part of this. Which of the 3 managers would you want to be managing your team if you were involved in this battle between Wilder, Farker and Parker?
I can see the merit in all of them, but I think probably Farker, purely just on the basis, and I know that would be pretty surprising to people, that he's built, in my mind, the best football team in the league this season. And if they continue the way that they've played, it would be, madness in my mind if they were able to. And some people would see it as a failing of him, but I personally think the football team that he's built have been so dominant in games because of him. And if there are individual failings in both boxes, then that blame doesn't necessarily lie at his door. Obviously Wilder's delivered and Parker have delivered promotions before, as has Farker. But that's the way that I would probably look at it. Yeah.
I definitely want Chrissy Wilder.
It's so tough.
I definitely want Chrissy Wilder.
I
want a front foot, proper orchestrator. We're looking at this in different ways. You're looking at who's built the best football team. I'm looking at the guy that I want in the trenches to do battle with. And partly because Parker and Farker, their method of managing, it's not to say they're not good man managers. It's not to say they don't speak well and they're certainly not as motivational when they talk to fans, and it's hard to know what happens between the four walls of the dressing room. But they are, and you kind of touched on it there about, well, if people don't perform inside the box for Farke, it's not really his fault. The slightly processy aspect of these two guys, Parker and Farke, who tend to be so, only concerned really in like, well, if you look at it, we dominated the game, we just didn't get it done in both boxes. That long term and overall, I see footballers trying to build the best football team, the one that creates the most chances and or concedes the fewest. But maybe for an 8-game fight like this, maybe I don't want the guys that are just falling back on processy type rhetoric. Maybe I want the guy that's, unapologetically
No, I get that.
trying to like wring every inch out of everyone. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, and with Wilder, obviously his ability to get teams over the line dates back a long time into non-league days. So I definitely accept that. I guess I'm just looking at it as who do I think is the best manager. And I think Farke is the one that I would want. And, the team that he delivered at Norwich obviously was impressive in terms of getting over the line too. A couple of quirks though, like I'd love to know, Leeds went off at Bramall Lane odds on, and should they not win the league and Sheffield United win the league, I'd love to know if that's ever happened before, that a team has been sent off odds on in a game away from home at the eventual champions and not won the league. I can't really imagine it has before. And also with Blades, like they've currently only beaten one team in the current top 6. They beat Sunderland at home back in November. They've got 2 more to come. They host Coventry and they go to Burnley. Like, again, can't imagine a team has had as smaller points tally from games in that mini league at the top of the table and won automatic promotion before. But, at the end of the day, they are where they are on merit, and they could probably get away with dropping points in both those games and still going up.
Yeah, they've only won 4 of their last 8 at home, Sheffield United. It's obviously no disaster, but when you look at Leeds having won 6, Burnley having won 4, but with the 4 draws compared to Sheffield United's 2 and 2 defeats, they picked up more points at home. So Bramall Lane needs to become just a bit more of a fortress, I think. I'm not making predictions on this. I just want to live it from this point, particularly that Easter Monday game between Burnley and Sheffield United. That's the 3rd last game of the season. So after that, there'll be only 6 points to play for. That's going to be absolutely vital. And the big games between, the top 4 last season were all just sensational, and I'm expecting the same there. My excitement rating out of 5 for this portion of the EFL is 5 out of 5. Thank you very much for a lovely game of 5s. Championship playoffs next up, George, where we've got Sunderland in 4th. They're on 69 points. Coventry are 10 back from them on 59. West Brom 57, and then beneath the playoff places, Bristol City on 57, but West Brom's goal difference is 6 goals better. Middlesbrough 3 back from Bristol City and West Brom on 54. Blackburn and Watford 2 back from that. Millwall, Sheffield Wednesday on 51, so 6 points off it at the moment. And then Norwich, I will give a cursory mention to them on 49, 8 points off it, but I say it with anger, because in the mid-season predictions, I threw my support behind Johannes Hoftorup's Canaries, and they have entirely let me and the fan base down, and I don't think that they have it in them to make the playoffs. When we're looking at form, George, over the last 8, the teams that we're talking about here for what we think are basically 2 playoff spots, right? One of the top 3 will finish 3rd. Sunderland will likely finish 4th. Not definitely, but likely. So probably 2 up for grabs. Coventry are in the best form over the last 8 and in 5th with 18 points from 8 games. Bristol City next up with 15 from their 8 games, and then West Brom with 13. Only 3 wins in 8, but 4 draws in there. Watford and Millwall have got 11 in their last 8. Borough 10, Sheffield Wednesday 9, Norwich and Blackburn 7 of 8. So it's not a group of teams in famously good form. And a lot of them, George, just don't really feel like teams that deserve to make the playoffs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's quite a weird position where, in Coventry, you've got a team in 5th who sat their manager, who's probably felt like one of the safest managerial seats in the whole of the EFL going into the season. And then below them, you've got West Brom, where Tony Mowbray, I think, is doing a pretty good job, but there is still the kind of feeling at the club that they aren't great and they're not particularly solid. Bristol City in 7th, a team that are still really battling and trying to get into the playoffs, having not done so since, 2007? The Hull final. And, they're knocking on the door, but still, every time they lose, Manning is so negative, and the rest of it. He was another one that was nearly shown the door early in the season. Borough fans, Carrick, not particularly happy with how things are going there. Like, it feels like a group of teams who are quite close to, certainly in the case of Bristol City, Blackburn, Coventry, quite close to achieving their pre-season goal. Yet there has been, either throughout the season or at times this season, been serious concern over the performance level. And I don't know what that says about the league in general. It feels kind of similar to me to last season, where we can probably expect the teams who just miss out on you mentioned earlier that whoever misses out on this 3-horse race will feel, it'll be a massive blow. I personally think whoever misses out on this 3-horse race will just win the playoffs. And I know that Sunderland and Coventry are obviously in great form. Sunderland have been up at the pace most of the season, but I think there's just quite a clear gap. And we saw last season how Leeds and Southampton dusted off, in particular Leeds, the disappointment pretty quickly in the semis to kind of dispense with two teams who'd picked up fewer points than them. So, yeah, I mean, whoever gets that 6th spot, I think Baggies are probably the most likely. Borough have, in terms of their fixtures, maybe an advantage. Yes, they host Leeds, but they've also got home games to Oxford and Argyle, which, given the home form, you'd back them to do fairly well in. It's very, very hard to say. As you mentioned, it kind of feels like lots of teams aren't in great form, and if one of them can just catch fire for a short amount of time, you back them. But Baggies and Bristol City, you probably think are the two most solid right now, especially with Blackburn after John Eustace, left the club and Valerian Ishmael's come in, have just completely dropped off, because they under Eustace, they felt like the one where you kind of knew what you were going to get, and you knew they'd carry on picking up points at a pretty decent lick.
Yeah, the underlying numbers over the last 8 games, it's actually quite nuts. There are 4 of the teams we're talking about are in the bottom 6 for the Championship over an 8-game period for non-penalty XG. That's Watford, Blackburn, Millwall and Middlesbrough. That's in descending order. So Borough, the worst numbers, the 3rd worst in the league in that time. You've got West Brom and Coventry, who are basically flat, like league average, broadly creating the same level of XG that they're conceding. And then at the top of this group, you've got Norwich, which seems insane, given that their form is poor in terms of results, but I think kind of sums them up. Really great team when the sun is shining, but can't handle any sort of pressure. Sunderland are in there as well. Bristol Cities are the strongest of the group outside that. And Sheffield Wednesdays are pretty good as well, which, I'm going to talk about Sheffield Wednesday after I talk about West Brom. So West Brom are obviously the kind of, I would say they're the main character here, because they're the ones to be shot at in 6th spot. They're the ones being hunted down. They're the ones whose form under Mowbray has been mixed. Some decent performances and results. Not a huge amount of wins, but very few defeats. And it's difficult to know exactly what to expect from them over the next period of games, which is just as well for the neutral, because they have a huge test in the next few weeks. Their next game is away at Norwich. Then they host Sunderland. 3 days later, they go to Bristol City, with whom they're level on points at the moment. Then they host Watford, still part of this conversation. Then they travel to Coventry City, who are above them in the league table. It's a massive 5 games. And I genuinely, if you told me they'd be 4 points off the playoffs after that, I wouldn't be astounded. If you told me that they were, 2 points above 7th rather than the current level on points, I could believe that as well. But of the group 9th to 13th, most of whom, as I alluded to, I don't really believe are playoff teams, I think the biggest player could be Sheffield Wednesday. And that's because their next 5 fixtures are Cardiff away, Hull at home, Blackburn away, Oxford United at home, and then Stoke City away. So this is a team that we have talked about quite a lot recently. Basically can't beat anyone in the top 10. And if they made the playoffs, I certainly wouldn't back them to win the playoffs. They've lost 5 of their last 8 games, but all of those are against teams in the top 6. And I would say in all of them, they pretty much went toe-to-toe. But they've got this group of 5 games against bottom 10 teams, not including Rovers, Blackburn, but they are basically playing like that. And they average 2 points per game this season against bottom 10 teams. So there's easily a world where they get 10 points from their next 5 games, I reckon, if not more, if Rel can really get them ticking. And then they will be closer to the playoffs. Currently, it's a 6-point gap. I think there's a chance in 3 weeks' time on the Monday pod, we might be looking at more like a 2 or 3 point gap with 4 games to play. And I think that would be quite exciting from a Sheffield Wednesday point of view. I maintain their performances have been good despite the poor results. But overall, I'm thinking it's West Brom or Bristol City, who I'm also very impressed by. I think they might just under the radar themselves all the way into the top six. I think the fans are starting to believe. I hope they are. I think they should be. And I'll ask you that question again, George, about managers. This group of managers is interesting. From Lampard to Mowbray to Manning to Carrick, Ishmael, Cleverley, Alex Neil, Danny Earl, Torrup. I don't have a particularly strong view there, to be honest.
Yeah, nor do I. It's interesting that Lampard has always struck me for all of his kind of the doubts that we've had. He's kind of the man for the big occasion. I mean, I think we've seen certainly at Derby, especially when you look at their playoff campaign and what happened with Leeds. He seems to be able to get his team to rise to a big occasion. And I guess you could kind of say that happened again when they bounced back from that defeat by beating Sunderland 3-0. I'm not saying he's the one I'd want, but I think there is, I think he might be a better manager for a playoff campaign than a 46 game season possibly. Liam Manning has tasted the playoffs and defeat in the playoffs when being done over 2 legs by Wickham with that brilliant MK Don side. Tony Mowbray has got experience in the playoffs as well. But none of them really kind of stand out as being the ones that you definitely want in your corner. The one I probably mentioned is probably Alex Neil and Millwall. If you're putting Sheffield Wednesday in the mix, then you have to have Millwall in the mix too, given they're currently sitting above them in the table, and he's someone who is a bit of a serial winner. But yeah, there isn't anyone here where you're saying like this is a guy that you really want there. But I would, whilst I'd normally be relatively down on Lampard's fit, and I think we are definitely seeing the fruits of having Joe Edwards in his corner at Coventry. I think it can kind of go maybe a bit missed that there was quite a big difference to the Frank Lampard managerial profile at Coventry compared to what we saw at Derby before that and previously, and that is who he's got alongside him. But I think there might be an element where what he's done as a player, his profile, his very obvious kind of charisma might genuinely be quite a strong thing to have in Coventry's corner when they come to the playoff campaign that surely they'll get at this point.
Bristol City versus West Brom, 8th of April. That's the game. That's the one. My excitement rating for the Championship playoffs out of 5, I'm going to give it a 3. If Wednesday go on the run that I'm predicting, it could be a 4 for sure.
I'm surprised by that, given that you're predicting
down at the bottom
a team currently in 12th who are miles off 6th to sneak in. You'd think it'd be higher than a 5.
Well, I figured I couldn't sit here and say I don't think any of these teams are particularly good outside the top 6, and then go, I'm really excited for this playoff chase. That wouldn't sit right with me. Down at the bottom, George,
0.
What a situation we've got. What a situation we've got. From the bottom up, Argyle on 33, Luton on 35, Derby on 38. The dotted line. Then Cardiff and Stoke on 39, but both with inferior goal differences to Derby. Cardiff's significantly so. Hull are 2 points above that on 41, 3 above the zone. Then it's Oxford and Pompey on 42. Swansea are on 44, so 6 points above it, but with 5 teams between them and it, and QPR are 1 point above them. Fixtures-wise, look, it's quite difficult to know sometimes, you can't always boil it down to a number, can you? Soccer Stats does do that. It takes the PPG, either at home or away, of your future opponents and boils that down into a number. Now, that would tell you that Hull City have the easiest run-in, but that is mainly because they have Derby and Luton at home, both of whom have barely picked up a point away from home all season. But it gets to this point in the season where I don't necessarily see Hull hosting Derby and Luton as a particularly good thing. There's so much pressure on that, and therefore I think when you start getting into the weeds of fixtures, maybe more so down at the bottom, you can kind of drive yourself crazy. Now, what I would say is, I did take a look at, if you split the league into 3, you look at the top 8, the middle 8, and then the bottom 8. It is still interesting to see, where those fixtures fall for each team. Portsmouth only have 1 top 8 team to play and only 2 in the bottom 8, with 5 in the middle. Oxford have 4 top 8 teams, 3 middle 8 teams, and 1 in the bottom 8, and that's Cardiff away. Hull have 1 in the top 8, 4 middle 8, and 3 in the bottom 8. Now, I hate Stoke's fixtures. They've got 2 in the top 8, and that's the top 2. They've got 3 in the middle 8, and then 3 in the bottom 8, of which 2 are away at Cardiff and Derby, and 1 is home to Luton. They're also playing home to Wednesday and QPR, who I think are awkward at best opponents, and away to Preston. Cardiff have home games against Oxford and Stoke, which has to be seen as a positive, I think. They have 2 teams in the top 8 and 4 in the middle. Derby, 4 teams in the bottom 8. They are the flyer at the moment. They're the one that everyone's looking at. And they have 4 games against teams in this chunk of the table. For Luton, I'm afraid it's very ugly. 4 top teams still to play, 1 mid-table team, and 3 bottom 8 teams, but all of them away from home, where they've been absolutely desperate all season. And at the bottom of the table, Argyle have a 6-point gap to make up, but they've already played all the teams in the bottom 8, home and away, which can't be ideal. 4 top 8 teams and 4 middle 8 teams. What do you want to say about this?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. As someone who has a stake in it, I don't like the way it's progressed. It felt like it was a relegation battle between a few teams who were really bad and could really pick up points, and that was a better position when you were kind of 10 points clear of it. But certainly Derby's 3 wins on the bounce, Luton winning a couple of games, has meant that this has got incredibly tight, and there's a clutch of teams, Oxford and Portsmouth being probably the main 2, who looked home and hosed at different points in the season. Pompey so recently after that 1-0 win against Leeds, and now are very much within it. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. Portsmouth are obviously the outsiders of the kind of genuine runners and riders in this, but they are one where their away form all season has been atrocious, and there's no getting away from that. And the games they have left away from home come at Coventry, Millwall, Sheffield Wednesday, and Norwich. And that is tough when you've only won 2 away games all season. And if they don't pick up anything or very little from those games, then there's going to be a huge pressure on their home form. And given we last saw them at home losing 2-1 to an Argyle team who I think we can mostly, they're obviously not down yet, but it would be one of the most incredible survival stories in my mind that we've ever seen since covering the EFL on this podcast, if Argyle managed to play their way out of it from this position. So I think Pompey are in it. I think Oxford's are in trouble too. The gap obviously is what Pompey and Oxford have got is strong and impressive, but Oxford, in terms of the fixtures themselves, don't make for particularly pretty reading, with Sheffield United, Leeds, and Sunderland all coming to town. When you've got 4 home games left and 3 are against the current 3 of the current top 4, that's not a particularly strong position to be in. When away from home, they're incredibly poor. The one thing that I continue to believe is that even though Gary Rowett isn't getting plaudits for the style of play that he was when he first came in, Oxford are rarely well beaten, and I'm pretty sure the way that the club are thinking about this is, if we can keep 4 more clean sheets in our 8 games, then we're probably safe, because that's going to yield at least 4 points, and the chances are probably more than that. And it feels that that's the way that we're approaching games. And whilst fans may not like it and it may cause for some tense moments, there's reason to do that in my mind, and I think it might, with Rowett obviously such a good manager at getting teams organised in that way, I think it might pay dividends. As you say, Stoke's fixtures are the ones that really intrigue me, where I'm pretty sure Mark Robbins will be delighted that they have to play Luton, Cardiff and Derby. Like, it gives them the potential to basically keep their destiny in their own hands and ensure that against those sides they can pick up a 3 points, which means they're not even looking at their phone to check the opposition score. They know there and then what's happened. Whether or not it comes to pass, that is a good thing, we'll have to see, because right now they are playing badly, and there's no obvious reason to see them turn it around. And the thing that worries me, we talk about profiles of manager and who you want to lead you into these situations. This is a ridiculously young Stoke side, and whether or not they have the experience to navigate their way out of this, I'm not entirely sure. I also think it's worth mentioning here that, I'm not going to go through every team, but I think there's kind of an assumption that Derby are now just going to be okay, even though they're still in the bottom 3, because they've won 3 games in a row. I'm not really having that. When you've been as poor as they have been for a long period of time, winning 3 games is massive, but Derby haven't overnight become a top 6 team. Like, I'm pretty convinced that's going to turn again, especially when you consider their last win was, last gasp away at Argyle. So I'm not saying I think they'll go down, but anyone who thinks that it's kind of a foregone conclusion that Derby are going to continue this good run under Eustace and eat as much respect as they have for Eustace and get out of it, I'm not entirely sure that's going to be the case.
Definitely take your point, but I think Derby will stay up. I think Derby will stay up, partly an intangible thing, partly a manager thing. There are a few teams in this group that, and this is a difficult thing to say publicly, and I'm happy to be proven very wrong here. There's a few teams in this group where, whether it's ownership, whether it's just general atmosphere around the club, whether it's how I perceive like the fans to be kind of backing the team rather than getting a bit worried and maybe adding some nerves from the stands to proceedings. I do think there are some teams where, like Derby, for example, under Eustace, I now expect them, certainly for the next few games, to be like absolutely roaring their team on and feeling kind of positive and getting that positive energy across. Hull, I'm not really sure about. I mean, they have the worst home record in the division. Any team with the worst home record in the division, like unimpressing their home fans week in, week out. That is a fairly volatile situation. I think there is some love for Ruben Sayes, and they've had some great away days, but not necessarily doing the business at home. When it comes to Cardiff, I'm particularly worried about this. As you know, I don't really trust in the ownership group. I don't think they set a particularly good tone throughout the club. Omar Reza has clearly done enough in his spell to keep the job, but whether this is right or wrong, I just have the sense that like they might make another change if they suddenly panic. But doing that, and the fact of thinking like that, if they are thinking like that, is in itself a problem, I think, and is a reflection of a club that's kind of been circling the drain a little bit. And I'm not sure you can do that forever. And then there's Stoke, who, obviously another club with absolutely no designs on getting relegated whatsoever, but who can't drag themselves far enough above it. And it's just the level of fear, I think, that can cause problems in these last games and cause the team to kind of find it more difficult than others. I think Derby will get above one of Stoke or Cardiff or Oxford United, but I don't know which one. And I think Cardiff against Stoke could be the key fixture here. My excitement rating is 4 out of 5. Excitement's probably the wrong word. Even though I don't have a stake in this, it kind of makes me feel sick. But
0 out of 5, thanks.
It's all part of the EFL diet. You can't enjoy the promotions if you don't have the scepter of Scepter. How would you?
I just wouldn't say it. I think I have the internal monologue of what you're doing right now, and I would just say something else.
Sometimes I'm speaking too quickly for my internal monologue to stop the words coming out of my mouth. Anyway, the Grim Reaper of relegation, over your shoulder. To finish the championship segment, we're going to hit the FotMob corner button. Fans of all clubs across the country will be delighted to hear that we're not highlighting a team in good form who may or may not go on to lose their next game. This FotMob corner is in association, I suppose, of sorts, with the England pod, which you've all heard plenty about at this moment in time. When England played Albania on Friday night, James Trafford was on the bench, and he plays in the Championship. And if he plays for England against Latvia, and who knows, maybe he will join Sam Johnston, Wilfred Zaha, Jay Bothroyd, David Nugent, and David James as players to represent England while playing in the second tier this millennium. We've banged on about it for years. This England team is littered with those who've seen EFL game time in their youth, in the pod era. From Esri Konza, Dan Burn, Joe Bellingham from the starters, Jude Bellingham, and many others on the bench, including Morgan Rogers, who was playing in the Championship just last season. So, on FotMob Corner this week, we're asking, who are the current EFL players most likely to represent England? And George, I'm interested to know where this has taken you.
Sunderland is where it's taken me. And you just got muddled up with one of their names. Joe Bellingham is one of the players that I want to highlight now with the England under 21 squad. I think I'd have been pretty surprised had I chosen Joe, if I'd known last summer that I'd be choosing Joe Bellingham for this, because he wasn't overly impressive. I wouldn't say in his first season at Sunderland, albeit incredibly young. But I'd like to blow our trumpet where we did 21 under 21 in the summer. And we spoke about Joe Bellingham, and we spoke about how Joe Bellingham had played up front. we spoke about how Jude Bellingham in an interview had described his brother as a thoroughbred striker. And we threw shade on that, and we wondered what was going on, because the Joe Bellingham that we saw didn't look in any way like a thoroughbred striker. He looked like someone who's playing very much out of position. And since he's moved back into a midfield role, he looks far, far more comfortable. And I think is now showing that he is a player who has massive potential in terms of what he could do in his career, both at club level, where Sunderland fans will be desperate to stay up the season, because I think, if for many reasons, but one of them because if not, I just cannot really see Bellingham still at the Stadium of Light next season. He's someone whose goal threat and creative threat is an important part of his game. It's not what he's all about. I'd say that he's never going to be the kind of goal scorer that we've seen Jude Bellingham become. I don't think he'll ever be a number 10 in the same way, but he's someone who is able to pick up positions on the edge of the box and get shots off. He has the quality to score very good goals. In particular, his goal against Oxford early in the season was a brilliant strike. And he's creative as well. Like he's a progressive passer. He's someone who likes to get on the ball and drive forward with it. And he's probably more often than not going to get the pre-assist rather than the assist itself. And I also like how his role, since Enzo Lefebvre came into the side before his injury, Bellingham was kind of almost creator-in-chief in that inside left channel. But then Lefebvre came in, and albeit playing in a different position because he was genuinely playing out wide, it saw Bellingham kind of drop a lot deeper and take up more of a holding midfield role alongside Dan Neil, which again, he impressed in. But yeah, the goal threat is there without question. His creativity is good. He's very comfortable in possession, and he's also a good dribbler. He's 31 successful dribbles this season as per FotMob. His dribble success nearly 60%. There are and 66 touches in the opposition box for a player that is playing as a genuine centre midfielder in basically a 4-2-3-1 is impressive. He's someone who takes risks on the ball. 52 times dispossessed this season, so shows that. But I think you want him to because of the talent that he's got. And defensively, he's really strong. And again, for a player who's still incredibly young, the way that he carries himself in the middle of the park, he's really combative. He's unbelievably energetic. He's the real deal by any normal extent in my mind. And then Chris Rigg, who is still only 17 years old, but the future this guy has is clearly absolutely phenomenal. He again is a big goal threat. Scored 4 goals this season. Maybe needs to work on his finishing. 5.5 xG as per FotMob, but 43 shots. And again, he's creative too. He's only got the 1 assist, but that's not necessarily fair given his expected assist is just over 2. But he's someone who again is able to find space in the final third and be decisive in his decision making in that area because he's a good ball carrier too. And these numbers, they may not on the face of it stand out as being mightily impressive, but then you have to factor in the improvement that is surely to come at his age, and what he's doing at this young age is so impressive. And you think back to Jude Bellingham at Birmingham, who again was posting kind of scratchy numbers. Like if you looked at the data back then in that Birmingham side, it wasn't jaw hitting the floor. What's he doing? It was kind of, you had to kind of watch him and see what he was doing in order to truly understand that the player that he was going to become. And finally with Rigg, again, he's given his small stature and his young and his age, he's still very, very good off the ball. He's someone who is happy to get stuck in, happy to get to play his part on the defensive side of things, and that's gonna set him in good stead. So yeah, I think there'll be a day where we look back probably in 5 or 6 years and wonder how a team with Joe Bellingham and Chris Rigg, will they get promoted to the Premier League? We'll see fairly soon.
I wonder if there's a chance that Jude Bellingham just wants his brother to be a striker so that he's not a threat for him in the England squad in the future.
Yeah.
What if Joe goes beyond him? He might take his spot. Or, hopefully, we will see both Bellingham brothers playing for England at the same time, which would be absolutely immense. I'm going to put forward Burnley's CJ Egan-Riley. Now, he's become a friend of the pod in the last couple of weeks. I interviewed him when he won EFL Young Player of the Month for February. You then interviewed him at St George's Park in England pod fashion as he's part of the under-21 squad. He's just turned 22. The thing that excites me most about Egan-Riley is what's to come from him, because this is someone in their first full season as a senior player who had quite an extended youth team life, really. First at Manchester City, where he was mates with Cole Palmer and James Trafford and all of that lot. And then, having joined Burnley quite young, still had to wait a good few years until he got his chance. But this season he's formed an incredible partnership with Maxime Esteve. Behind them, James Trafford. Between these three players, all under 23, they have been the best championship defence ever in terms of clean sheets. And that is unbelievably impressive for someone playing in their first full season as a senior player. He had a spell at Hibs, he had a spell at PSV's second team, but this is his proper taste, and boy, does he like the taste of it. I think also there's an aspect of which centre-back feels like one of the more likely positions for someone playing in the EFL to eventually represent England. The forward areas now, the elite academy talent seems to be dominating. I think with Rigg, for example, there's absolutely no doubt he's one of the most impressive 17-year-old footballers I've ever seen. But the depth and the quality that England have in those areas is pretty stacked. Whereas at centre-back, yes, there's some good centre-backs, and there's the likes of Colwill and Branthwaite and Harwood Bellis, who are also young and probably ahead of Egan Riley in the pecking order right now. But when someone's doing this in their first season, I think you just wonder how good they might be in season 5, season 6, when they've learned the art of defending even more so. His stats, well, they pop off on the ball. He's really good on the ball, and that's obviously quite important for modern centre-backs. He can be a playmaker of sorts from the back, which is what you want. In particular, his long passing is really good. His big switches out to the wingers, Jayden Anthony in particular, have been huge for Burnley this season to get attacks generated. And he's just super confident on the ball, wants the ball, wants touches, wants to play passes, wants to play forward, and that's a big tick in the box. His defensive numbers don't pop off so much. He wins his duels at a decent rate. His recoveries are really impressive, one of the best in the league for centre-backs, but his aerial duels are poor. He's not particularly good in the air. He's a little undersized, you'd probably say, and that could be an issue against more physical strikers, as we saw against France under-21s on Friday night. But stats for defenders often don't tell the whole story. Him and Esteve have a partnership where Esteve is the front-footed defender, and Egan Riley is kind of the mopper-upper, and he's very good at that. I think Ezri Konsa has to be the comparison here, someone for him to emulate, starring for the England team now. John Stones type, right, rather than a Maguire or a Dan Burn or maybe a Jared Branthwaite. I'm really excited to see how Egan Riley goes. Maybe it's a stretch that he plays for England one day, but based on his 6 months of work in the last 6 months, you do wonder how good he could become. And then I'm going for Michael Cooper of Sheffield United, another goalkeeper like James Trafford, and it'd be really interesting to track their progress together. And they are in direct competition for automatic promotion. They're in direct competition for basically being the best keeper in the Championship this season. Cooper's stats are incredible, and they have been for the last 3 years. They are incredible this season, where he's conceded 25 goals from 32 expected goals on target faced. He's kept 19 clean sheets in 36 games. Last season for Argyle, it was 22 conceded from 27.7 faced, so just under 6 goals prevented. The season before that in League One, 30 goals conceded from 36.6 XG on target faced, just over 6 goals prevented. I haven't seen this level of consistency for a goalkeeper in the EFL for a long time. And again, when you consider that, although he's 25, so not as young as Trafford, these are basically his first 3 or 4 full seasons as a senior goalkeeper. He's barely ever made a handling error. He's clearly got an unbelievable mentality, and I think those are really good signs. Then there's the fact that the England goalkeeper depth is not hugely stacked. Pickford is in his 30s now. Dean Henderson and Aaron Ramsdale, actually, they're only a year and 2 years older than Cooper, so that's probably his main issue. He doesn't have the Premier League experience yet. But I could see a world where Cooper gets to the Premier League with Sheffield United, potentially impresses even if they do struggle next season, potentially even if they do get relegated. I could see him getting signed by a mid-table Premier League club, a bit like Pickford did, moving from Sunderland to Everton. And then I could see him really establishing himself as a Premier League number one. And if he does, he'll be in contention for England, because there just aren't that many English keepers around. So there you go. 4 names for us. Be interested to know what you guys think. Thank you to FotMob for providing the stats and data to back up our arguments. FotMob's our favourite scores app, but offers so much more as well. You should download it, and if you'd like to, you can use the link in the show notes.